Hey y'all, Redless here, coming at you with another ADV video. So I've been competing in the ADV Revival tournament recently, the Jim Cool tournament, and I've just finished the second round robin round. I went 3-0, and a lot of that is because I prepared for the opponents that I was going to face and really precisely looked at what teams they tended to use and their sort of tendencies for handling different threats, and then picked teams that I had that could exploit the weaknesses and the inconsistencies with the styles that they would use. So I very much targeted my opponents, play the player, not the game, is something some people have said. But when I was first starting ADV, I wanted to do that, and I had a really hard time doing it. I didn't know how to target people with specific tendencies or people who like to use certain teams. So I decided to make this sort of video series going over how I prepped for my opponents and how you can sort of look at someone's teams adversarially and try and figure out what styles they might be weak to or what techs you can use to exploit them. So my opponent for round 2 is this fellow named Golden, not to be confused with Gold, the tournament director. This is a guy, I think I'd seen him around a bit. He went 3-1 in the first round. I lost to F2JK, I believe, FJ2K. But overall, he's been winning a lot, and he won his first round against his first set of this round against Ombrarch. So without further ado, let's dive in and look at some of the builds this guy brought. Okay, so this is his team over here. This is a pretty standard Skarm Mag team. So he's running Skarmory and Magneton. And then he has sort of a defensive core with Tyranitar, I guess, to remove Gar. And then with Gargon, Bliss can take most special threats. Melodic maybe helps out against fires. And this Flygon serves as a DD check, as well as it looks a bit more offensive. So maybe he was also using it as a sort of progress maker. A lot of people dislike Flygon as a progress maker. They think it's really weak because it gets walled by Skarmory and it lets Gengar in for free, and both of those are really threatening Pokemon. But because he's running both Magneton and Tyranitar, he can remove both of those. Pursuit Tyranitar removes the Gengar, Magneton removes the Skarmory, and then Flygon can actually have an offensive presence. And if you've never faced Flygon with both of these things removed, it can actually be a tough nut to crack. Because behind a substitute you can't really status it, and it has, quick slide, and it has maybe coverage for Celebi or something. It can be quite dangerous. So I sort of like the cut of this team. Immediately, I'll talk later about how the conclusions I sort of drew. So it looks like he ran this team a second time over here. And then he ran a sort of variant here. So previously he was running Bliss and Skarm, and this time he was running Celebi and Metagross. Metagross looks like a lure. I don't know what the hidden power is, but it's a bit more of a progress maker. Maybe it can handle Swampert, which is another thing that harms Flygon's ability to make progress. And then with Swampert sort of dealt with, Flygon can do more. He doesn't have the spikes this time, which I think makes this team less consistent in slower matchups. But the boom from meta and the pressure that Celebi exerts, especially if this is a Calm Mind build, but even just with Leech Seed, might still help him out in those matchups. I don't like this team as much as I like the other one, because I find it doesn't have that offensive presence that comes with the spikes. If I were substituting spikes out on a team like this, I would add a really all-in offensive guy, like maybe a Aerodactyl or a Salamence. Aerodactyl likes spikes though, but a Salamence or another sort of choice band guy, or maybe something like a Moltres that's really hard for offensive teams to switch into, but can still make progress versus defenses. or a non-choice band Salamence. If you get the reads right, you can kind of break defenses on its own, especially with the spikes down. And then Tyranitar can enforce the spikes by pursuit trapping the spinners. If you can get them when if it's a Starmie, you can get it when it's recovering, and if it's a Claydol, I guess you have to wait for it to rapid spin and then hit it with Crunch, and then hopefully you wear it down. But Claydol lets Skarmory in for free, so maybe you can get Skarmory in whenever Claydol comes into spin anyways. Chip it a bit with Drill Peck and then use Tar to finish it with Crunch. Anyways, sorry, that's kind of long-winded. What I mean to say is, I wouldn't, unless this is Choice Band Metagross, which I doubt, it literally says Leftovers. I don't really approve of that switch. I think it's fine, I think it's justifiable, but I would have put something with a bit more firepower on. Yeah. And here's the same team. He used it again. Yeah. Looks like he has a habit of using the same teams. I noticed that. Here's a different team he ran. This is sort of a similar idea. Arrow with no spikes, which is strange because he's got the Suitar. I noticed he really likes Suitar. He's got the Milo. That's basically a pattern, is that Milo is going to be showing up on a lot of these teams. And he has the Yama, which is good for breaking down Starmie and just sort of making sort of permanent progress versus a lot of teams. If you don't have Wish support and Yama successfully knocks something off, then you're going to be taking a lot of damage. One thing that's notable in ADV is that nothing that is sand immune also has access to like instant recovery or consistent recovery. So anything that Yama knocks off will either be taking sand every turn, which sucks, or will be any damage you hit it with will stick. So Yama, yeah, it's fearsome that way. But this team does seem a bit passive and a bit slow. This is a fun Jirachi set. But yeah, he's got the Milo and he's got the Arrow this time, but you know, I don't see how this thing is breaking through like a Rock Resist. None of these things really look like a Swampert lure, for example, if it was a Swampert. Or even, to be honest, even a Metagross lure, I guess maybe Yama could be. So this team seems kind of passive. It served him well in a lot of these matchups where his opponents maybe are playing more offensive teams. Looks like this team has a Breloom and Gengar, so maybe it's a bit more offensive, and he was able to, well, I guess he lost this one. I guess he lost this one too. But against these sort of faster teams, this one has a Raikou. It has no spin. It has, it has defensive things. It has Swampert and Meta, but not really a ton of, I guess, sustain. You don't see Blissies. You don't see Jirachis, this sort of thing. This is a hyper offense, of course. Okay, so that's the first kind of team that I noticed that Golden was using. A second kind, and I guess he just used it for these two games, was Rain, right? Actually, it was the same Rain team both times, as far as I can tell. This is an interesting structure. We got Rain, but you don't have a, a Zapdos on here. Instead, you're opting for the P2. So with no Zapdos, you're it's less telegraphed that you're going to bring in Doug and click beat up. But you lose out a lot on your early game pressure. And that sort of comes around to what I decided I was going to exploit about this guy. So if you notice on this team, it's actually very Skarmory weak. That may seem weird since it's essentially, 5 special attackers and Doug Trio. But actually none of these special attackers 2-hit KO Skarm. Suicune is probably 3-hit KOing at best. I mean, Celebi, if it's a fire variant, it's barely 2-hit KOing after 1 Calm Mind. If you enter with no Calm Minds up, then you're pretty set as a Skarm player. Jirachi has Fire Punch, but it still doesn't hit that hard. Porygon 2 is weak, and yeah, Kingdra needs to turn a setup before it can really lay the smackdown. And meanwhile, Doug just lets Skarm in for free. So that's a big disadvantage of Zapdos. Zapdos-less special offenses. Special offenses already can't really fit a spinner very easily unless they're running like an offensive Starmie that happens to carry spin, or if they're slowing down and running a clay doll for some reason, which I don't recommend. Do I recommend it? I don't know. I think it's an interesting tech, but it's not mainstream. Anyways, so I thought, spikes are actually a very good pick into a team like this. There's basically 4 ways to deal with spikes in ADV. This isn't an exhaustive list, but I generally think of these as the 4 directions you can go. One direction is that you bring Magneton. Scarm is the most common spiker and the most dangerous spiker in that it gets in very freely and very easily. And Fortress is also maggable. It's not far behind. So against the vast majority of spikes teams, if your mag enters on a ship Skarmory, as the Skarmory spikes, you will successfully eliminate the Skarm before it can spike again if you're running the modest magnet set. And thereby, you'll position yourself very well in the long game. So this is a team that, besides Skarm and I guess Flygon, is completely spikes weak. These big defensive pieces both take a lot from spikes. So if you can force them in repeatedly on spikes, you can get a lot of momentum versus them because they'll need to be clicking their heal buttons. But this team, I guess, strives to mitigate that weakness using mag. But if somehow Skarmory were able to sort of exist permanently, mag was removed or mag couldn't trap the spiker, then you'd be able to prey on it very well. So the 2 ideas that I had for targeting a team like this were running Cloyster and running Skarmory plus Dugtrio. So I'll talk a bit about Cloyster. I think Cloyster is one of the strongest and most underrated Pokemon right now. My opinion changed a lot from the past. Cloyster has a ton of notable downsides, but its upsides are also very, very good. The biggest upside is, as I said, it is immune to Magneton. It can enter on like a Milotic. It enters on all waters, really. On a team like this, and it spikes with impunity. Milo can toxic it, but you don't care. And you just get all your spikes up, and then you win the long game, ideally, versus a team like this. Another advantage of Cloyster is it kind of beats Skarmory. Why is that? Well, it gets all its spikes up. They trade spikes, but Cloyster comes with Rapid Spin. So versus like a very fast Skarmory team that's maybe spike reliant, like a spike offense, Cloyster can come in really clutch and can dispatch the spikes that Skarm puts up while it's trading spikes with Cloyster, and then it puts you a long way ahead defensively as well after an early game filled with spiking from both sides. Another thing Cloyster has going for it, although Skarm has this too, super physically bulky. You don't really see it versus this team, but on a lot of teams, especially Magneton teams, they'll be reliant on carrying several physical attackers, stuff like Snorlax. Cloyster is 180 base defense, and it basically takes nothing from physical hits. One of the reasons it can wall Swampert, even though it doesn't resist Earthquake. I actually believe Pump does more than Earthquake to Cloyster with the standard Pert set. But yeah, that puts you very far ahead. Now, annoyingly, Cloyster takes sand and it takes spikes. So you kind of have to play at a faster pace if you're using Cloyster. Skarm, of course, can kind of flit in and out all match, and it passively heals, and it just annoys your opponent. Maybe it puts up spikes several times. Cloyster can't really do that. It doesn't heal at all. It's just going to be spiking and then dying. And as a result, you kind of have to put Cloyster on faster teams. And you have to put Cloyster on teams that don't mind just not having spikes sometimes. It's the nicest way I can put it. because Cloyster is not a consistent spiker. Skarm enters on 2/3 of this metagame. It enters on Waters, Celebi. If it's not Zapdos or a fire type, it's not one-hitting Cloyster or Skarmory. But a lot of stuff, every electric type, random stuff with grass or electric moves, one-shots Cloyster. So you can't really bring it in as aggressively as you can, something like Skarmory. So your team has to be okay not having spikes up a lot if you bring Cloyster. And what's the other downside? The big downside of Cloyster. Actually, this one's an upside. So Cloyster comes with Boom. So maybe your team is a bit more offensively inclined with Cloyster. You can capitalize on that by having Cloyster Boom at a key time after spiking, or before spiking, or when something enters to spin on it to stop stuff from setting up. Cloyster can do a lot. It can do stuff like check Suicune even with its Boom. So I kind of had the idea of Cloyster here. It seems like it does well into all of these mag builds. The mag builds don't have Doll. That can mess Cloyster up. If you run Cloyster with Gengar, it's less of an issue. And it's still kind of annoying though. Obviously, if it's just pure mag though, then Cloyster just tends to dominate. Okay, so what are the other ways to handle spikes? Sorry, long way around. Another way is spinning like this. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. He only did that in one of the games I looked at. Oh, also I looked at these two games. This is from this round. You can see it's another mag build, and he ran a slower team, so that's extra Cloystery. And then this is another mag build. Okay. So I was really like getting excited to bring Cloyster to these sets. But yeah, okay. So if you're not running mag, and you're probably going to be running spin if it's a slow team. Spin's by far the most common way to handle spikes on slow. And then the other two ways that Bear mentioned are of just avoiding the spike damage. You can do that with Superman very commonly, just levitating above all the spikes, or you can do it by just playing the game really fast. If your Pokemon are switching in twice each or once each, or even like 3 times each, maybe for 1 or 2 of them, you don't have to care about spikes because you're just not taking that much damage from it. It's a very different game that you're playing when you have to switch in 5 times and you take half your health in spikes or more than half your health, versus switching in, just a few times and taking a lot of trades instead. And those types of offense teams that sort of try and outpace spikes also tend to go well with Zapdos or with Charizard, or Moltres, whatever you want, Raikou, because those Pokemon tend to kill Skarmory and to force ambiguous situations after entering on Skarmory. There's basically no good switch-ins to every Charizard set in the meta, besides, I guess, Milotic with Refresh. But generally, until it's revealed, Charizard is always at risk of getting a kill. And even after it's revealed, it's a huge threat versus almost every team. Milotic teams being the big exception. Anyways, sorry. All that is to say, teams like this that aim to outpace Skarm or outpace spikes, but that don't have a way to exploit the most common spiker, Skarm, I tend to think they're pretty weak into spikes, and they might fall flat into a team style that revolves around spikes. But then I looked at these two games, and I decided that the most important thing was beating Magneton, and beating Magneton without spin consistently. The other way, besides Cloyster, to handle these sorts of mags is to run Dugtrio alongside Skarmory. And what that allows is, if you're lucky enough that your Skarmory enters on something that isn't going to be firing a move that kills Dugtrio, I mean stuff like Flygon, where it can't hurt Skarmory at all, Celebi, where it's going to be clicking fire, if anything, or leech. Those are the only two good examples here. Basically, if you have a team where you can get Skarmory in on something that doesn't threaten Doug Trio immediately, you can immediately go Doug on the first turn you have Skarm out, and most of your opponents will click Mag if they have it, because remember, if this team lets 3 layers go up, even if it kills Skarm, it's kind of fucked. This version specifically, because there's 5 grounded Mons. If you can get so they will always go Mag basically when Skarm comes out, and because I know that, I can instantly go Doug and I can kill the Mag, and then Skarm is alive. They don't have a plan versus Skarm. I'm guessing there's no fire on this, and it walls the rest of this stuff. So you just PAs them to death, and otherwise win the long game if you bring like a solid stall build. So those are my 2 ideas for exploiting this guy who's a big Magneton user. I wanted to prioritize that matchup since he's shown it in 7 of his games, including his most recent 2 games, rather than going too hard on this build or on one of these 2 builds. I didn't think this build was particularly threatening. It's kind of slow moving. And this build, while I think it could be threatening, I had other ways of handling it. Like I packed a bunch of protects. I packed some stuff to deal with this, some tech options on the teams that I wound up bringing. So now let's look at the games. Okay, so this is the first game. So this team that I brought, I'll just fast forward to the end. It's the Cloyster build. So you got this tar, and this is a banded tar. The aim of this tar is it forces in a water, ideally a Swampert. My opponent doesn't have Swampert, but if they did, then Cloyster can enter. Cloyster spikes repeatedly, and then the rest of the team kind of abuses the spikes. You got Arrow, you got amazing Zapdos and Gengar, great spike abusers. And you have, of course, a banded tar. And with spikes down, a lot of these Pokemon just become extremely difficult to come into. This is a defensive pert. Actually, this is great with spikes because it can force out a massive amount of threats. It's just immune to so many things defensively. Also, this team is a good candidate for Cloyster because a lot of these Pokemon are threatening without spikes down, Arrow and Tar specifically. The Zapdos has Toxic. It's Protox Zap, also to help the Rain matchup. Got the 2 protects for that. But the way the team is set up, and with Gengar, you don't necessarily need spikes up to make progress versus teams if you can't ever get that in for Cloyster. The initial variant of this, by the way, was very DD Mence weak. I packed a more offensive Gengar. Actually, it had Hypnosis and it had Focus Punch, 2 Flummox Pursuit teams that I thought were dangerous. And I decided against that because I needed the DD Mence check here. DD Mence kind of runs over everything else on here. This team is still very Zapdos weak. My opponent showed no Zapdos, even on this team that was like a perfect place for Zapdos. So I wasn't really that worried about Zapdos, but that sort of lack of a comfortable switch into electric moves would end up punishing me in the long term because Magneton, of all things, hits quite hard with electric moves. Anyways, so let's watch. So immediately I was pretty excited. He brought Milotic, so that's kind of what I was expecting. I was just thinking, yeah, this is probably a Magneton build, and I immediately went to Cloyster. Remember, Cloyster doesn't care about water moves, and it doesn't care about being toxic versus a team with no spinner, because you just get your 3 layers and then Cloyster leaves. So I just immediately went Cloyster, let's go. Okay, and then he showed Hypnosis. And then I shit my pants. Because I hadn't actually looked at what his Milotic had carried in the past matchups. I kind of, didn't analyze it. I didn't look at those pieces. And this team with the Milo lead does carry Hypnosis. Cloyster, if it is indeed this team, is one of my most important pieces. So I was very worried that it would successfully get the Hypnosis off. But with Cloyster in, I figured it was time to start spiking. Maybe he would miss another Hypnosis. Maybe Cloyster could just sit on Milotic. I didn't say this earlier, but my Cloyster, this Cloyster, and all my Cloysters use a very specially defensive build. It's actually a build I got from HClat. It has almost maximum special defense, and it's able to take things from Milotic much easier. It's able to live Thunderbolts from things like Starmie, defensive Starmie, and Gengar, which are common switch-ins. And so it's able to spike in more situations and generally stick around for longer. Okay. Yep. Yeah. Okay, so he hit Hypnosis that time, and I fell asleep. I think I clicked spikes there, but I knew I was keeping this boy in, try and get him waking up, and he goes Mag. I guess he knew I didn't have Scarm, so Mag turned from his Trapper into sort of offensive piece for him. Unfortunately for me, I wasn't thinking about Mag as an offensive piece when I picked this team, and my only resist to Electric is Pert, which will take a shit ton if this happens to be Grass Mag. So I was very worried. I did get my spike successfully, but there is no way the Cloyster is living a T-Bolt, so I had to immediately click to Pert. Okay, and he Toxic, he read that. Now, I don't care about this, because remember, my Perts were fresh. So I didn't really have to worry. At this point, I was low-key panicking, because I didn't know if I would have a way to handle this Mag. I mean, obviously I have ways to revenge it. I have the Tar, I have the Arrow, but I don't want to be locked into Earthquake. And I think Zap 1v1s it, especially if I force it out. So I opted just to keep this guy in and click Refresh. The idea being, I don't think you run Grass Mag on teams like this, because you're very 4 weak otherwise. And so I knew that I kind of wanted to keep Pert around. Yep. And he goes straight to Lax. I clicked Toxic. I was just trying to pressure this Milo, keep it from immediately Hypnosising again, or just alternately take the Hypnosis with Pert. I figured Pert would not be an important offensive progress maker, but it would be able to sort of wall things, so I figured it was a good candidate to take the Hypno. But instead he went to Lax. So for me, as I said earlier, I love Cloy as a Lax switch-in, so I just immediately went to Cloy again. And clicked another spike. Nice. Magneton is notoriously specially weak, so arguably I could have surfed there. Started to get some chip on Magneton, but at this point I was thinking, Pert maybe walls Magneton if it's the Toxic variant, and maybe I have a lot less to worry about from Magneton for that reason. So I go back to Pert, take this, and then he reveals he is indeed the Grass variant. Extremely dangerous. Yeah, that was very scary for me. I don't think it's proper to run Grass on this, but I guess he picked the default set or something to have this. Luckily, Pert is very bulky, so it was able to take this, and within the Torrent range, it was able to almost one-shot Mag, at least put Mag into the point where I could deal with it with spikes after forcing it out from there. If he had grassed earlier with this team, I knew I was in for big trouble. But because he chose to grass later, when I got the 2 spikes up and when I was able to surf him in return instead of having to refresh in return, I felt just much happier. This easily could have gone very, very wrong though. Yep, so here I go for a Protect. I decided it's time to conserve the Purse, I guess, for some reason. And I go to Gar. I didn't think he would go for a Thunderbolt here, and I thought that Gar was not going to be that useful as a spin blocker on account of the fact that he probably doesn't have a spinner. Conversely, it's also not that useful as a Lax check because Tar and Arrow both check Lax as well as the aforementioned Cloyster. So Lax is actually not that big a threat to this team. So Gar doesn't necessarily have to serve as a check to it. So I successfully remove the Magneton at that point, and in comes Tar. Now my Tar check was Swampert, but it looks like that's no longer a reality since it's been chipped to within an inch of its life. This is where I would maybe wish I had the focus punch still on Gar, like in the old days, but I don't, so I opt to aim for a burn instead. Thank heavens it hit, and it turns out he was Suit Tar. I probably should have picked up on this. I don't think I glommed onto his Suit Tar love when I first looked at his teams, but yeah, he loves it indeed. Cool. And so then from here I go Tar. My Tar is extremely threatening, and actually it's not that bad for me to get locked into Earthquake. The reason being, if he's shown this team, none of his guys are that resistant to Earthquake besides the Ments. And yeah, I don't think I was referring to this battle. I don't think I was referring to his battles during my fight with him, so I didn't know what his 6 were. And even if I was referring to it, maybe I would still give room for him to have other 6s. So I went for the Rock Slide here, try and do huge damage to whatever his rock resist is as it came in, and see what the rock resist might be too in the process. Because at this point, with this many spikes up, I was thinking this is probably an Aerodactyl clicks Rock Slide type late game. Anyways, the Milotic avoids it, which is unfortunate, but it's not like I haven't gotten lucky this game. So the 2-turn sleep, dodge, and the Hypnosis, yeah, I got really lucky. No two ways about it. Now I keep Tar in. I believe that Tar just eats a less invested Milotic Hydro Pump, or if it had surfed, I think it eats every surf. I was frustrated to see that it was Pump. I think offensive Milotic is an underrated set. And I certainly wasn't playing around it. I was thinking, if I can trade with this and then force the Milo out, it's as good as dead. And that gives me a lot of space to play with Aerodactyl and even play with Swampert maybe in the future. But that can only get you so far. And in this case, it got me killed. So I went straight to Zap. If he goes Lax here, it's not too bad for me, simply because he takes spikes and he takes a lot. But instead he opts to go Tar and sacked the Tar to get Lax in for free, in which case I go Cloister. I've said it before, I'll say it again. This thing walls Lax like better than Skarm does in a lot of cases, and it can boom on Lax. So it's a great Lax answer. Yeah. So I decided I would get my my good old third spike, and at this point Cloister has lived its needed purpose, so I decided it was time to blow it up on one of his defensive pieces. Yeah, my Lax answers are running out, but with 3 spikes down, I didn't really need that many Lax answers. Yeah. And he hits the Hypno, and then goes for the Recover. Unfortunately for him, I had the special defensive investment. Still takes 40 because it's very specially vulnerable, but I wake up, get another very small amount of turn sleep, I guess the 3-turn sleep in this case, and blow it up. And yeah, with it dealt with, I go straight to Pert. At this point I'm thinking maybe there is a Metagross Last, I reckon. I'm also considering like an Arrow Last or a DD Ments Last, which is what it turns out to be. And with that in mind, I knew that it might be important to have some chip heal on Pert. So I went straight to Pert and angled to get that up. Yeah. So I go for Surf there, taking advantage of the Torrent. I think it was probably improper to do that. I think it was proper to go for Arrow there. Keep Pert healthy and allow it to check if it's like an Agilogross. But I didn't think of that at the time, so instead I just get a Live a Body Slam and dispatch the thing. Okay. So now I'm realizing if this is Agility Rock Slide, this is potentially sweeping me because my Agility Rock Slide answer, which is this thing, is very close to dead. Yeah. Oh, sorry. That must have looked weird. But if I can live a slide with a Zap, because I have but some defensive investment. And so I just need to chip this into the range where I can kill it with that move, with Thunderbolt, if worse comes to horrible. and it agilities and then kills Pert. So I'm prioritizing getting a Torrent Surf off onto it, and just trading Pert for that. I want to note, I guess, that if he opts to just kill it, then Zapdos 1v1's Metagross, and his best situation is blowing up on Zapdos so that he doesn't just get toasted. But remember, it's Protect Zap, so I can simply protect the boom. I guess I don't go for the immediate... Wow, I'm playing this extremely differently than I just said. No, instead, I'm trading this Zapdos for the meta. And he does indeed show Slide. I do indeed get the hit. And yeah, I kill it. I guess this doesn't matter because if he's Agility and I get the 2 turns of leftovers, I actually eat the Earthquake, I believe. But yeah, it's still a piece of luck for me. If that had happened, yeah, I think that was a slightly more precise way to play the end game. Anyways, I hit the Rock Slide and win. Arrow only ended up having to come in once, just to check the Ments. So that's a win. I could have played that a bit more precisely. Didn't play around the Milotic as well as I should have. Forgot to acknowledge Magneton as an offensive threat. But overall, the reason I won this is because I brought Cloyster and because I got 3 spikes without any resistance, because this guy is very big into Magneton as a spike answer. Okay, so now let's play game 2. Game 2, I decided to bring the Skarm Doug. In fact, I brought a team. The team is Registeel V5. So you got Doug, Claydol, Skarm, Bliss, and Milo. In other words, you have very little ways to make offensive progress. But versus a more stall-oriented build, like I'd kind of seen from him in the past, I was confident that this team could outlast that team, because even though it doesn't have pressure, it has the Calm Mind Blissey, and it has the Doug, and it has the 2 booms that it can kind of use to sort of tactically sneak in a long game and get kills where it maybe shouldn't be allowed to. But over a long game, people make mistakes, and this team can capitalize on them. I also like this team a lot versus Zapdug. I guess this doesn't count as Zapdug. But special offense, because I find that the Registeel is able to be a special check. This is 168 special defense careful Registeel. So versus like a Zap lead, you can P-haze it or not P-haze it, but 1v1 it and force it out. Yeah, and it lives it lives Earthquake from quite high for Dugtrio, so that's it. That's an advantage too. And if Dugtrio has to switch into a toss, then it can no longer trap Blissey, which is good counterplay versus special offense. But the star of the show for this team, how I wanted to use it this game, was to have Skarmory in, ideally on like maybe not a Metagross, maybe a Metagross, on something, and then go Doug, Lickety Split, to catch the Mag as it came in. So we'll see if I'm actually able to do that, or if I'm able to achieve just the still very powerful backup plan of getting 1 spike and then dying. Okay, so he goes Celebi. I go Registeel. Forget what my thought was. I didn't know what Celebi this is. Typically, Celebi is seen as a lead on more defensive teams that don't have a way or a need to immediately exert like offensive presence and ambiguity in a lot of matchups. So I was thinking maybe this is a more defensive Celebi. On the other hand, this dude loves Magneton, so maybe it's Swords Dance Pass or something like that. If it is Swords Dance Pass, I can blow Registeel up and then kill the Celebi with Doug. If I Thunder Wave it. But instead of those things, I immediately decided it was time to go Skarm. Would I do that again? No. But he does get the Leech Seed, and yeah. And he passes. I was cognizant of pass. So pass is one of the reasons that I was afraid of Magneton as a guy holding Doug in the back, because I knew that I couldn't, instantly go Doug into this Celebi, because if he happens to have pass, which is common from the lead slot, then he would mag me, but yeah. He passes anyway, as I spike, do the conservative thing, and he gets the trap, and yep, immediate FUD. Rip. Maybe I should have roared there, try and see what his team consists of, but yeah, in an early game like this, I think I was fine just taking the trade of the one spike for the Skarm, and especially because I get the Swift Doug revenge kill on it here. Okay, and he goes Flygon. Now, we saw before that this guy likes Flygon as a progress maker. But Flygon actually, one of the reasons I liked this team is because it possesses Melodic. And Melodic basically walls all forms of Flygon to hell and back. Flamethrower Flygon can't break it. Whatever weird coverage it runs for Celebi, like HP Bug, can't break it. HP Ghost can't break it. Toxic can't break it. And so I just went Melodic. And he shows Sub, consistent with what he had done in the past. Yeah. And he shows his own Melodic. Not surprising, given what we saw from him in the Scout. But yeah, I get the Toxic down. And I click straight over to Bliss. This team does not have a way to break Melodic. You have to Toxic it, and you have to basically PP stall it, or ideally you PP stall Toxics using Blissey and using Calm Mind, because it can't actually force Blissey out without Toxic, and Blissey can, sweep most teams if you let her get enough boosts. I didn't think he was Doug looking at this. So, yeah. If he was Doug, he would have to be like Curslax last. That could be hard. But no, he goes straight to meta. Because it was Toxic, I felt it was going to stay in and recover, in which case I could fish for a crit with T-Bolt, or he might go to something like meta. Flygon notably doesn't actually beat Blissey. Celebi probably doesn't beat Blissey with this set. Maybe with Leech Seed it could, but if I burn the Leech Seed PP, then he doesn't in the long term. So I decided to click Thunderbolt and reveal that, and I ended up getting the hit on meta, which is kind of what I wanted. Meta is one of the few threats that can really break through a team like this. It's pretty unambiguous that meta can just destroy me if the wrong things happen, if the wrong things go down. And worst of all, meta has Boom. So what looks like the best meta answer on here, Melodic, doesn't really want to come in on meta, because for the simple fact that if meta booms Melodic, who's going to kill Flygon? The last is Claydol, remember? And that's not a good Flygon answer. So what I actually tried to do here is I'm thinking, how can I can defuse this Metagross right now while also offering a trade that favors me. And the best trade, all of the trades kind of favor me because of Doug in the back. Doug can trap meta, and so I go to Claydol. Actually, no, I believe this is my misplay of the game. No, I do go to Claydol. I go to Claydol thinking, it can break Claydol and then Doug revenges, or Claydol can force it out, make it so that it takes damage with Earthquake, and thus it can't stay in, and it takes some to the spikes without getting as much leftovers. Anyways, he just goes back to Celebi. Again, I haven't seen that this thing has any setup moves. It has Pass, so it could still easily be Swords Dance Pass. It could even be Calm Mind Pass, probably not on this 6. But, I try and be wary of Pass Celebi because this team doesn't have really any way to speed control. The closest thing it has to that is Sweet Doug Trio, but depending on what it is, like if it passes to this Flygon or if it passes to meta and meta gets an agility off, Doug is not going to be a safe switch in, okay? So I was quite worried about that. This could be very, very dicey if he turns out to Swords Dance here. I might have to blow Registeel straight up, which, I only have so many booms to work with before I need to start dugging things. And if he applies a lot of pressure with Celebi, things could get hard. But he opts to immediately pass out instead, going to Flygon. So this Registeel is actually counter. So I was thinking I might counter here to catch his Flygon, but I also considered, maybe I'll save counter for when I really need it. He could easily sub and then things get very tough for me. Sub, of course, is punished hard by Milo, but it's not that hard to punish. So I decided just to make good on that punish and go for Milo. And he clicks, I guess that was Bug. I guess he expects that I'm Doll last, which is a fair assumption. I go Milo, and I immediately try and target Celebi, because the Celebi coming in is the thing that is most dangerous to me here. It has pass, who knows what it could be holding. Very threatening. And I'm just trying to make that as hard for him as possible, make all of his Celebi ins as thoughtful as possible. At the same time, if it is, so this is probably a pretty slow team based on how he's been playing it. This looks like a slower Milo than his off Milo last game. He might be Recover, and then it's a toss-up on whether his Celebi can actually handle Doug. And if we can get Celebi to reveal Recover, and then maybe, ideally reveal like some dumb grass move or something, then, or some, if he's SD pass, basically, if he's Recover Swords Dance, and he doesn't reveal a grass move, then Doug can get in on Celebi every time it comes in. And it won't be a guaranteed kill, but if Celebi is chipped enough, or if Celebi's toxic, to the point where Celebi can't just, pass out or recover and pass out, then Celebi dies. And that disables his main win con at this point, since he's probably not spikes. So Claydol's expendable, check meta, let Doug in type thing. Yeah, that disables Celebi, which is what I really want. Okay, so then I went Blissey. Blissey seems to just threaten everything on his team. These two take ice. This guy doesn't have any sort of recovery, and he takes spikes. And meanwhile, this girl takes T-Bolt. So Blissey is actually a big progress maker, weirdly, and it's modest. So I clicked T-Bolt. At this point, I was running the calcs. I think Doug with Bug does a minimum of 66 or something. So I was just off the calc, and I decided to go Registeel so that I would have a boom in the back if worse came to horrible, and so I could maybe paralyze it to try and get started. I don't like getting leeched. I never like it. But to prevent him from sort of, getting a lot of momentum versus me, I went to Doll here because that's also another boom. So it's another way I can punish him for Swords Dancing. And he chose to go to Tar. So yeah, this is probably Sutar. As I read correctly, and he crunches. We both kind of knew what was happening. This is a very common situation, common pattern in this matchup, that we both kind of have to attack each other because I'm very fucked if he suits me as I leave. And meanwhile, I actually 1v1 him. So anyways, so I EQ, he crunches, we kind of both know what's up. But inside, I'm actually very excited because I've been getting spikes damage this whole game, specifically on Celebi, and it hasn't been sticking because Celebi has recovery in the form of leftovers that's now been negated because of the sandstorm. So I continue to sort of bully Tar out. As long as Doll is alive, I can use it as a meta check because all I really want from it is to die and then let in the old Doug trio. Registeel can also be a meta check. It eats Earthquake and then can kill with counter. As I said, I didn't reveal counter. So it can sort of force meta out at least, probably gets the kill with counter. But if I can keep Claydol around, just the more booms I have to diffuse the Celebi, the better. Okay, so Milo enters. She's looking a bit battered, so it might be a time for recover for her, which is good for me. I can get Bliss in, and I can start either chipping Metagross or Celebi, or maybe even chipping Milo herself. Milo can't really make progress versus these two, or honestly even versus Registeel. So I can kind of go between these two and just wall the Milo out. So I go Bliss, time for some progress. He opts not to recover, strange. That time he does, so I go for the T-Bolt. As expected, Blissey kind of hits lightly. So my options here are either to fish for a crit or to grab a Calm Mind, and then I 2-hit KO, which is more dangerous. I think I opted to fish for the crit first, just knowing that he was likely to leave. There's no reason for him to stay in. It's not like he breaks me. And he goes to Celebi. Just a little bit longer, and I've diffused this guy because he's one spike chip away from getting dugged. if I bring Doug in. Okay. So that's what I'm thinking. I go to Registeel, and he passes out. I think he's playing around Doug very hard here. He's quite afraid of the Doug threat. Okay, so in comes Flygon. This, again, I considered, again, popping counter, but yeah, overall, it's a risk that I just don't have to take. I could see a sequence where he maybe has Slide or Toxic, and he suddenly is breaking Milo, or he crits a bunch. I just didn't want that to happen. Milo gets always crits, so I wanted to bring it in on EQ. Even though it's kind of battered, it's kind of hurt. I knew I would just have to spend one turn not getting crit before I was out of crit range via healing. So I was looking forward to that. Rather than, playing some risky game with Registeel, whereas if Milo gets crit after playing that game, then she's just toast. But of course, the option where Milo, notoriously crit prone, this thing can rest loop like a defensive Zapdos for days or recover loop it. But the moment there's one turn that it needs not to be crit, Milo gets crit. And at this point, I was like, well, fuck. I actually don't have a way to wall this Flygon, so I need to start accelerating the game, either with counter, maybe with a boom, or maybe just with Blissey's Ice Beam, to try and actually make progress versus this team, because I can no longer kind of lock it out and let the Spike chip Celebi so I can eventually click to Doug. I have to start making proactive plays. So I go to Bliss, and I click Beam. He goes to Metagross. Pretty standard, pretty expected. It still takes the Spike chip. Bliss is the best Spikes abuser. But because I have nothing but Metagross counters besides the Bliss, I felt okay. Believe I go Doll here. The reason being, Doll was more chipped, and Doll is potentially less convincing as a Flygon killer. And so I felt if I had to trade something to Metagross, I would rather be Doll. And he goes for the EQ. I guess he thought I was going Steel. But yeah, with Doll in, I decided it's time to click EQ, and do indeed do that. Now here I could boom the Doll, but Milo is actually not that threatening to the team. Blissey just 1v1s at long term, and Blissey is kind of the linchpin that he has to take out. So taking out Milo and spending one of my precious booms to do so would not be a good use of resources. Instead, I go to Blissey, and we begin our dance of him recovering and me thunderbolting. Except before the dance is able to begin in earnest, I show my... Nope, I guess I don't yet. I eventually show my secret weapon. I guess I wait for him to fish for freeze once so that I can get a turn where I'm guaranteed that he doesn't switch out. Because that's what I was kind of worried about, right? That he would switch. And that's when I pop my Calm Mind. I now 2-hit KO him. Very bad for him. And he has to go to Celebi. He's now put on the defensive. But I figure he's never going to leave Milo in here. I mean, Milo, if she leaves now, she's leaving the healthiest she can be, right? I figure he's going to leave. And if he goes meta, I'm not actually that threatened. Because if he goes meta, I just go Dull, and I get to do some things, and then Blissey re-enters the next time Melodic comes in, and then he's back in the Vortex, but with his Metagross weakened or even killed. So instead I played around the Ice Beam, and I get the crit. Oh no, I didn't crit. I just did a normal amount of damage. Okay, and now he goes to meta. Again, this is the sort of endgame that I was worried about. I kind of have these two stealth Metagross checks because I have counter on Registeel that I still haven't revealed. And I have Claydol that if it dies, Doug gets in. So I just go to Dull, take the mash, and he crits me. It doesn't matter because it would have two-shot me anyways, and I would have stayed in. And I successfully get the Doug. Boom, dead. He goes to Flygon, sort of the final boss of the run. I think I calc at this point what Bliss is capable of taking. I figure he's going to probably click Earthquake. No, what did I figure? He clicked Sub. I forget what it is. I agreed that he wanted to go Sub here. And so I came in Registeel, I no longer need it because Bliss kills both of these. If the Sub is down, and I decide, it's time for Registeel to exit stage left. The thing is, that's a good way to put this. The reason I decided not to keep Doug in there. The reason I decided to play around the sub by going Registeel is because his melodic showed Ice Beam, so potentially there is an endgame where Blitz gets frozen, where I might want Doug to come out to allow me to proc Natural Cure and allow me to reset. Okay, so Registeel's out now. I believe it's a roll whether he 2-hit KOs me, since I'm now full or close to full. So I click Toss just to disarm the sub, and then I prep my counter, of course I do, which I've been holding this whole time. Unfortunately, he gets the roll and kills Registeel before I'm able to counter him to death and win the game. Now Bliss comes in. He's forced to click Earthquake as I click Beam, and with Flygon vanquished, my opponent fishes for a freeze. If that had frozen, I would have been glad I kept the Doug, right? But it doesn't freeze, and so I win. Yep. This is not one of my prouder games in terms of picks, so I guess that defeats the purpose of this series. The purpose being me counterpicking and scouting and micro-targeting my opponent, and talking about how I do that. This is just a team I was very comfy with that also happened to have this 2 Pokemon combo that vanquishes a lot of Magneton structures if they are not careful in how they play it. But regardless, the Cloyster build hopefully was very informative, even though I didn't play that game as well as maybe I could have. But yeah, I won the set, so I'm happy with how it went. And I think I played pretty precisely this game. So thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope this newfangled replay thing has been working properly, zooming in. But yeah, thanks for watching and have a good one.